Imagine the scene: a bearded prospector, smiling, pulls a huge gold nugget from a stream. This image is part of the American myth. Now, for the reality of the 300,000 people who rushed to California chasing a dream, 1 in 12 would die within the first 6 months. The California legislature itself estimated in 1850 that the mortality rate reached 20% annually. This meant 1 in 5 prospectors didn't live to see the next summer. Your dream of wealth would most likely have ended in an unmarked grave from dysentery. The gold rush wasn't an adventure. It was the largest and deadliest lottery in U.S. history. It all began in January 1848. Carpenter James Marshall was building a sawmill for John Sutter when he accidentally spotted shiny particles in the water. This occurred on January 24th on the South Fork of the American River. Attempts were made to keep the news secret, but in vain. The spark quickly spread throughout California, and then, thanks to the enterprising Sam Brannan, who ran through the streets of San Francisco, waving his hat in a vial of gold dust, shouting, "Gold! Gold from the American River!" it ignited into a wildfire that swept across the entire nation and the world. By 1849, the fever had become a global pandemic of greed. Farmers abandoned their fields, clerks their offices, soldiers their posts. A flood of people poured into California from all over the world. Americans from the East Coast, Mexicans, Chileans, Europeans, and even Chinese. They were known as 49ers. So many abandoned ships accumulated in San Francisco Bay, their crews having simply deserted for the diggings, that eyewitnesses described it as a floating forest of bare masts. They sold everything they owned, went into debt, and embarked on a journey with no idea what lay ahead. They were united by only one naive belief: gold lay right beneath their feet. But to reach this gold, you first had to survive the journey. There were 3 main routes, and each was a death trap. The first was overland, over 3,000 miles along the California Trail. Thousands of wagons slowly crept westward, but the main enemies here weren't Native Americans, as myths suggest, but nature itself and disease. Particularly infamous was a stretch in Nevada, aptly named the 40-mile desert. Here, caravans found their way by the skeletons of livestock and the shallow graves of those who came before them. People died of thirst under the scorching sun, froze in the Sierra Nevada passes, or perished from accidental gunshots. But most often, cholera killed them, spreading rapidly through camps due to contaminated water. The second route was by sea, a long, grueling 18,000-mile voyage around Cape Horn, a graveyard of ships. This journey took 5 to 8 months. All this time, you were confined to an overcrowded vessel that more closely resembled a floating prison. The monotony drove people mad, and the food consisted of weevil-infested hardtack and putrid water. Here, your main enemy became scurvy, a disease caused by a lack of vitamin C. It slowly destroyed the body from within. Gums rotted, teeth fell out, and skin developed ulcers. Many simply didn't survive to reach California, arriving either dead or crippled. The third option seemed the quickest, crossing the Isthmus of Panama, but the shortcut often proved to be the surest path to the grave. First, weeks of agonizing jungle transit by dugout canoe along the Chagres River, teeming with malaria and cholera. And then, waiting. Thousands of people accumulated on the Pacific coast, waiting for months for a ship to San Francisco. This wait in unsanitary camps could last longer than the entire journey around South America. Simply reaching California was a victory in itself, a triumph over death. And so, you arrived on shore. Instead of a thriving city, San Francisco was a chaotic jumble of tents and wooden shacks, mired in mud and refuse. Some of the first hotels and warehouses were built directly from the hulls of those very ships rotting in the harbor. The air reeked of sewage, cheap whiskey, and desperation. This was not the promised land. This was the frontier at its most wild and squalid. In California, only one law prevailed: the law of supply and demand. Taken to an absurd extreme, simple goods cost a fortune. A single egg, $1, which today would be equivalent to over $30. A pair of worn-out boots, $100. A doctor's services, often from a charlatan, could demand an ounce of gold. A popular saying went, to own a mine in California, you had to bring another mine with you to support it. Your savings dwindled before your eyes, and you found yourself in debt before even finding your first gram of gold. Prospector camps, with telling names like Hangtown or Last Chance, were breeding grounds for disease. No sanitation. Toilets were merely pits next to tents. Thousands of people lived crowded together on tiny plots of land, and all their waste and mining refuse, including mercury, were dumped directly into the very streams from which they drew their drinking water. Under such conditions, cholera or dysentery spread with lightning speed. Your body, weakened by the journey and poor nutrition, was an ideal target. Imagine this settlement. It consisted almost exclusively of young, desperate, and armed men from all over the world. They spoke no common language and shared no values beyond the lust for gain. The ratio of men to women in the early years reached 30-to-1. There was no police force, no social institutions. Loneliness and distrust were your constant companions. Every man was for himself, and by the time you arrived in 1849 or 1850, the biggest disappointment awaited you. The richest and most easily accessible claims were long taken. It was like arriving at a feast when only dirty plates remained. The early 48ers had skimmed all the cream. You were left with the choice of either working for others for meager wages, venturing deeper into unknown territories at even greater risk, or attempting to pan for gold in already dug over land, yielding minuscule results. The work of a prospector itself had nothing to do with romance. Your main tools were a pan, a pickaxe, and a shovel. Panning for gold meant hours of monotonous work, standing knee-deep in icy water that chilled you to the bone. It was like trying to find a grain of sugar in a bag of sand, all while standing in freezing water. More advanced methods, like the sluice box or cradle, required teamwork, but the earnings also had to be split. It was a 12 to 16-hour workday, 6 days a week, in summer under the scorching sun, in winter through freezing rain and snow. The result, chronic back pain, rheumatism, arthritis. Fingers swelled and cracked from constant contact with cold water. The desperation from scurvy was so great that prospectors would pay an ounce of gold, the equivalent of 2 weeks' wages, for a single pickled cucumber. A day of hellish labor might yield $10 to $15 worth of gold dust, most of which immediately went towards exorbitantly priced provisions. Day after day, week after week, you dug through tons of earth, and the results remained meager. The psychological pressure was immense. This condition was called gold fever, not in a metaphorical sense. It was a genuine mania, an obsession. Each new pan of dirt was like a lottery ticket that almost always came up empty. You'd see someone nearby strike it lucky with a nugget, and that spurred you to work even harder, driving yourself into an early grave. But more often, you saw others like yourself, exhausted, sick, and stripped of all hope. Very soon, by 1852, the era of individual prospectors ended. Surface gold was depleted. Extracting from deeper layers required technology. Pickaxe and pan were replaced by hydraulic mining, powerful water cannons that literally washed away entire mountainsides, and shaft mining, requiring explosives and crushers. This was only feasible for large companies. Yesterday's dreamer and adventurer transformed into a wage laborer, earning a paltry salary for grueling work in dangerous conditions. In this new reality, where the dreamer became a laborer, there was no place for law. In the diggings, there were no sheriffs, no courts. Here, only one rule applied: the law of the strong. As the saying of the time went, God created men, but Colonel Colt made them equal. Your revolver was a far more persuasive argument than any claim papers. The most common crime was the forceful seizure of another's claim. The moment you found a vein, someone stronger would appear, claiming it was now their land. Any dispute instantly escalated into a brawl, a knife fight, or a shootout. In response to this chaos, so-called miners' courts emerged. These were brutal forms of vigilante justice. The accused was judged by a mob of his peers. Sentences were delivered almost instantly: flogging, branding with hot irons, or death by hanging. Justice operated on the principle of trial at 10, verdict at 11, hanging at noon. It was swift retribution, but not fair due process. Often such courts became mere pretexts for settling personal scores or eliminating rivals, especially if the accused was Mexican, Chilean, or Chinese. The only islands of civilization in these camps were saloons, gambling houses, and brothels. After 16 hours of hellish labor, prospectors went there to squander their last specks of gold on cheap whiskey and gambling. It was the only way to forget, which only dragged them deeper into a vortex of debt and despair. Professional swindlers and gamblers fleeced the exhausted laborers. It's said that bartenders earned more by simply sweeping up the gold dust spilled by drunken patrons on the greasy floor than the average prospector made on his claim. The gold rush also exposed the darkest sides of human nature. Violence against California's indigenous population reached genocidal proportions. In the first 20 years of the rush, The Native American population plummeted by 80% from 150,000 to just 30,000 people. Latino and Chinese miners were forcibly driven from their claims, subjected to an exorbitant foreign miners tax of $20 a month, and often simply murdered, knowing there would be no repercussions. The American dream, it turned out, was not for everyone, but the main enemies were invisible. They lived in the very water you drank. Cholera and dysentery killed more prospectors than all accidents and violence combined. At that time, the germ theory of disease did not yet exist. People genuinely believed that diseases spread through miasmas, bad air. No one understood that dumping human waste into streams turned them into deadly poison. The diseases caused monstrous dehydration and could kill an otherwise healthy man in less than 24 hours. You could survive a 3,000-mile journey, fight off bandits, only to die from a single glass of river water. Your body slowly deteriorated from within. A prospector's diet was depressingly monotonous. Salted pork, beans, and rock-hard hardtack. Fresh vegetables and fruits were unavailable for months. This led to widespread land scurvy. The symptoms were horrific. Gums swelled and bled, teeth loosened and fell out, joints ached with unbearable pain. People literally rotted alive. Potatoes and onions were more valuable than gold. There are known instances where desperate prospectors paid $1, a huge sum at the time, for a single onion and ate it like an apple, trying to ward off the disease. Qualified doctors were virtually non-existent in the camps. Their place was taken by charlatans selling miracle elixirs that at best contained alcohol and opium, and at worst were simply poisonous. The irony was that the gold extraction process itself slowly killed you. Mercury was widely used to separate the precious metal from ore. Many prospectors suffered from chronic mercury poisoning, manifesting in uncontrollable tremors, hallucinations, and a slow descent into madness. A simple leg wound almost always meant gangrene, an amputation without anesthesia, and the operation itself, death from blood poisoning. But the gold rush broke more than just bodies. Constant stress, loneliness, physical exhaustion, and shattered hopes led to profound depression. The suicide rate among prospectors was one of the highest in the world. In rare, honest letters home, phrases like, "I curse the day I ever heard the word gold" appeared. Some simply went mad from despair, their minds unable to reconcile the dream with the reality. The dream of wealth devoured a person from within, leaving behind only an empty shell. So what would have ultimately killed you? The answer: everything at once. It was a perfect storm, a deadly cascade. Exhausting labor undermined your immune system. Poor nutrition made you an easy target for scurvy, while contaminated water infected you with cholera. And in such a weakened, sick, and desperate state, you became an ideal victim for violence and fraud. The chance for an ordinary person not just to get rich, but simply to survive, was virtually zero. So who then won this lottery? Certainly not the prospectors. The real winners were those who, as the saying goes, sold the shovels during the gold rush. The most tragic example, John Sutter, the man on whose land the first gold was found. Hordes of adventurers plundered his farms, stole his livestock, and he died a complete bankrupt. In contrast, Samuel Brannan, the very man who shouted about gold in the streets, became California's first millionaire by selling picks and shovels at exorbitant prices. Levi Strauss created his famous durable pants. Fortunes were amassed by saloon owners, hotel proprietors, and transportation companies who built their wealth on the misfortune of others. And yet, despite all the tragedy, the gold rush forever changed America. It incredibly accelerated the settlement of the West. California grew so rapidly that it became the 31st state as early as 1850. The gold, extracted at the cost of thousands of lives, helped finance the industrial boom in the North and ultimately ensured the Union's victory in the Civil War. But this progress was paid for with the blood of tens of thousands of dreamers whose names history simply erased. The myth of the gold rush lives on today. It's a symbol of the American dream of quick success. But the truth is, most surviving 49ers didn't stay to build a new life. They returned home, eastward, with empty pockets and broken health, forever cured of the fever. Their story is a harsh reminder that behind every grand dream lies a harsh reality of how easily hope turns into obsession and the pursuit of wealth into a race with death in which almost everyone loses.